since a long time, but more intensively recently. So because my talk was just to contextualize a little bit, because we were supposed to give 3 lectures, each of us. And my lecture is always a response, trying to respond, if not just to add a footnote to the work of Bernard. And Bernard is supposed to talk about technodiversity for the 3rd lecture, but he changed the subject. But I hope that still that there are some resonance that we can have, and in order to open up the discussion. But I just try to summarize what was said in the first lecture, titled Machine and Ecology, that I try to analyze the status of machines, or what we call a digital technology today, and the philosophical signification of it. Namely, the overcoming of dualism and the end of philosophy, according to Heidegger. And towards the end, I concluded by returning to the question of locality, or more precisely, what I call technodiversity, and that is where Bernard ended his talk. In the 2nd lecture, we emphasize on the varieties of experience of art in order to think how the question of locality could be thought in art, and in terms of different modes of access to truth. And maybe if we have time, we will come back to the question of Aletheia, of Heidegger, and what does it really mean by different, for example, it could be, what it could mean, for example, in Chinese thought, or other kind of thought. And in this last lecture, I would like to turn to the question of artificial intelligence, which is evidently one of the most significant subjects today. And I will try to use artificial intelligence as an example to demonstrate how can we push the question of technodiversity further, more than from a historical analysis, but rather to think what would be the implication of technodiversity for the conceptualization, understanding, and imagination of artificial intelligence. So in this context, I'm not suggesting here how artists can work with artificial intelligence, which of course is an important subject, but rather to understand the limits of artificial intelligence in order to think concretely what art can do, what is the implication of what I call technodiversity. And as usual, I will start with 2 quotes here. One quote is from Marvin Minsky, one of the founding figures of artificial intelligence, in an article published in 1961, Step Towards Artificial Intelligence, where we read, "There is, of course, no generally accepted theory of intelligence. The analysis is our own and may be controversial." And here we have to understand that insofar as the concept of intelligence is partial, it is always controversial. And because it is controversial, it is always open. Now the second quotation is from Hubert Dreyfus, who started as a scholar of Edmund Husserl and then a scholar of Martin Heidegger, and among other things. But he's most well known for his work on the critique of artificial intelligence, and here we read, "If the persistent difficulties which have plagued all areas of artificial intelligence are reinterpreted as failures," now he's referring to his enemy, Marvin Minsky, "these failures must be interpreted as empirical evidence against the psychological, epistemological, and ontological assumptions. In Heideggerian terms, this is to say that if Western metaphysics reaches its culmination in cybernetics, the recent difficulties in artificial intelligence, rather than reflecting technological limitations, may reveal the limitations of technology." Now, so this will be the 2 guiding quotation for us to start this lecture today, and I divide it into 3 parts. One is first, cybernetics and intelligence, and second, the worldness of the world. And here I would like to make a link with what Bernard says about milieu, the question of the world and its relation to what was called milieu, a term which is charged with a lot of ambiguity. Now, in the 3rd part, I will talk about what is called, what I call the cosmotechnical nature of intelligence. And because I think probably most of you didn't follow the 1st and 2nd lectures, so maybe the concept of cosmotechnic is a little bit strange for you, but let's see how far we can go with this. So first part, cybernetic intelligence. Now, if I said that I wanted to expose and want to discuss with you the limits of intelligence, but in what way can we talk about this limit? Provided intelligence, as long as it is artificial, it is more susceptible to mutation than human intelligence, and we don't yet comprehend completely the mechanism of human intelligence. How can we talk about the limit of something which virtually does not have a limit? The artificiality of intelligence is fundamentally material. However, the intelligence which is artificial has the tendency to liberate itself from constraints of matter by acting against it in order to schematize itself. We can understand in this sense that in creative evolution, Henri Bergson distinguishes intelligence from instinct. For only the former, let's say intelligence alone, is able to produce tools, instruments. Therefore, human is first of all Homo faber before being Homo sapiens. Bergson then correlates intelligence with matter and suggests that the development of intelligence is fundamentally a geometrization of matter. So intelligence penetrates into matter in order to produce a geometrical schematization of it. This definition of intelligence creates a tension in Bergson's philosophy of life. On the one hand, Bergson wants to overcome this geometrical confinement by returning to a philosophy of life based on the notion of élan vital, like what he did earlier with an opposition between abstract space and real duration. Élan vital distinguishes organism from mechanism, because the later, let's say organism, because mechanism wants to explain life without life. Therefore, mechanism ignores the ground from which life emerges. Élan vital is not something that can be objectified and verified. It is a creative force which allows the exteriorization of the intelligence in terms of tools and the interiorization of these tools as organs. And this is basically a kind of primary definition of organology in Bergson, and we can see its continuation in many authors from Canguilhem de Simondon and also to Bernard's work. Intelligence, through the invention of tools, allows the complexification of the organism by adding to it exteriorized organs, or what Bernard called exosomatization. On the other hand, through geometrization, which should not be identified with mechanism, we have to pay attention here, intelligence being exteriorized, though temporarily confined to matter, also liberates itself from matter, or more precisely, it enables itself to be transferred from one matter to another. Maybe we can call it a modern form of transubstantialization, from a word used in Christian religion. This gives the artificial intelligence capacity to produce faster and vaster mutations than human intelligence. I call the paradox of intelligence because intelligence which constantly exteriorizes itself in order to interiorize them, like what Hegel calls the cunning of reason, also something that was used by Canguilhem to address the constant process of interiorization of the exteriorized organs of a human being, may finally fail to reintegrate its exteriorized or its exteriorization, and ends up being threatened and subordinate to its own exteriorization. And that is what Hegel calls the unhappy consciousness that we witness today concerning mass employment and the defeat of the human. It seems almost evident to us today that in the long run, machine intelligence will supersede every quantifiable, I emphasize, quantifiable function of human intelligence, and consequently problematizes the notion of elan vital attributed to the organic life, as it was already happening in cybernetics in the 20th century. On the limits of artificial intelligence is not to show what are the weaknesses of machine intelligence, what it could not do, it still cannot do, and what it will not be able to do. Because machines are part of the evolution of the human species. It is one aspect of evolution which human beings were able to control but are in the process of losing control. To expose the limit of artificial intelligence is not to render machine controllable again, but rather to liberate machine intelligence from the biases on which intelligence is, and therefore to conceive a new art and new thought for machine intelligence. To expose the limit of machine intelligence, we will have to understand its history and that which motivates and constrains its evolution. One often fails to understand that the technical reality, a term used by the French philosopher Gilbert Simondon, inscribes in itself also the human reality. Not only because it is the realization of a certain mental scheme, but also the social and political structure of the human society. Human society transforms itself through technical inventions, which restructures the human reality. Consequently, therefore, matter and spirit form a reciprocal relation. There is no materialism without spirit, and there is no spiritualism without matter. Any failure to recognize this reciprocal relation only leads to its own self-defeat. Technical evolution is first of all motivated by epistemological ruptures. Epistemological ruptures, which is the discovery of the spirit through which its principles of operation were revolutionized. And then we come to the question of the operator that we can discuss with Bernard later. This rupture, which we want to focus here, is the shift of machine intelligence from a linear mechanical inference to a recursive digital operation. The term recursion has several nuanced meanings, but for the moment being, let's understand it in terms of reflexivity. This shift conceals the mysterious force, power of machines, which we are still far away from appropriating it. How then can we articulate this historical moment of the evolution of machine intelligence? This history of evolution of machine intelligence could be interpreted as effort to overcome Cartesianism or Cartesian mechanism. We know that the mechanization and rationalization attribute to Cartesianism dominating in the 17th and 18th century could be best captured by the image of a clock. In a clock, the cause and effect is enchained by physical contact between different gears. And this question of this notion of contact, this notion of physical contact is also very important for Descartes' own thinking. For example, even his thinking on light, on optics. In a clock, because this linear intelligence, from one cause to an effect, and then the effect becomes cause of another effect, which is materialized in gears and pulleys, give us automata like Jacques Vaucanson's digestive duck. As you know that it is a mechanical being produced by the French engineer, and this artificial duck was able to eat and to digest and also to lay egg, to shit. And the duck was demonstrated everywhere in Europe and finally ended up in Leipzig. And also later, the alienating machines in the Manchester factories described by Marx in the 19th century. However, this epistemological paradigm, generalized as a mechanical world picture, foreground scientific researchers, for example in Newtonian physics, cause effect is linear and reversible, as well as economical analysis, for example in Marx. the analysis of capital is basically an attempt to mechanicize the operation of capital. The epistemological rupture from mechanism necessitates a different paradigm and therefore a re-evaluation of all disciplines already shaped by the previous paradigm. The emergence and elaboration of a new epistemology in the 20th century, which I generalize as recursive or recursivity, provides an overarching ground for a series of new ideas, including cybernetics, systems theory, which includes of course also the general system theory of Louis von Bertalan and Philippe Bernard talk about, complexity theory, ecology, among other disciplines, which function according to a nonlinear form of reasoning. This nonlinear reasoning liberates machine intelligence from the confinement to a linear causality which characterized the 17th, 18th century machines, and consequently gradually assimilates the operation of an organism. And this was the contribution, or at least the theoretical contribution, of cybernetics. If you remember well the first chapter of Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics, Control or Communication in Machine and Animals was titled Newtonian and Bergsonian Time. Newtonian motion is mechanistic and time symmetric, hence reversible. Bergsonian time is biological, creative, and irreversible. It is not until the second law of thermodynamics proposed by the French physicist Sadi Carnot, the Bernard showed the picture of him before, in 1824, almost a century after Newton's death in 1727, that we recognize the arrow of time, and that the entropy of the system increases with time and is irreversible. Already in his first book, Essai sur les données immédiates de la conscience, 1889, Bergson launched a fierce attack on the way that time is conceptualized in Western science and philosophy. Time is understood in terms of space, for example, intervals which can be represented in space. Therefore, the time that was thus conceptualized is in fact timeless. It is homogeneous like the intervals marked on a clock. Instead, time, suggests Bergson, cannot be fully understood as extension ordered in spatial terms. Rather, it contains homogeneity or qualitative multiplicity in organic forms. Time is force, which is singular in every instant, like the Heraclitean river. It doesn't repeat itself twice, like a mechanical clock. Indeed, mechanical or linear causality doesn't exist in duration. Bergsonian time provides a new way to understand human consciousness and experience. However, this was the story 100 years ago. These differences between the Newtonian time and Bergsonian time define the boundaries between physics and biology, machine and organism, and we have to remind ourselves that biology is actually a new discipline. It only emerged at the beginning of the 19th century. The task of cybernetics was to show that with the advancement of physics, especially statistical mechanics and quantum mechanics, it is possible to employ notions such as feedback and information to construct a cybernetic machine which breaks this boundary, the boundary between machine, organism, physics and biology. Therefore, towards the end of the chapter, Vienna claims that, and we read here, and this is a quote that I already said, pronounced in the first lecture, but I think it's still, we need to reflect on it constantly. We read together. The modern automation exists in the same sort of Bergsonian time as the living organism, and here there is no reason in Bergson's considerations why the essential mode of functioning of the living organism should not be the same as that of the automation of this type. In fact, the whole mechanist vitalist controversy has been relegated to the limbo of badly posed questions. Now I consider cybernetics as belong to a paradigm which I called organismic, or organicism, which includes the work of Alfred North Whitehead, read from Bertalanffy, but also more largely the computational paradigm produced in the 1930s through Kurt Gödel and Alan Turing, but we don't have time to go through these, maybe during the discussion. Now, in Vienna's conceptualization, which we grasp, when we grasp a glass of water and bring it towards our mouth, it involves multiple feedback loops and adjustments according to the information evaluated, which in turn measures the level of organization. The concept of feedback is rather simple. However, it opens a new way to conceptualize a non-mechanistic machine, or in other words, Vienna is claiming that a Bergsonian machine is possible. This claim of cybernetics, namely to overcome the stereotypical opposition between machines and organisms, has a significant impact in the development of technologies, especially machine intelligence. As we know that when neural network is evoked, people are always reminded of the work of Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitt, who provide the first model of neural networks based on cybernetic principles. In McCulloch and Pitt's account, brain activities could be seen as a logical operation made possible by the neurons. Neurons are both memory and logical operators, which recursively update their individual states and the overall result. In short, cybernetics is also our point of departure as well as the lens through which we can analyze our actual situation. So I wanted to posit cybernetics as a divide, but also at the same time as a critical apparatus which we can use to evaluate our actual situation. This account of history is similarly distinct from the standard history story regarding the origin of the term artificial intelligence, closely associated with the Dartmouth Conference in 1956, associated with Marvin Minsky, as I quoted, John McCarthy, Claude Shannon, among others. And its further development from weak AI to strong AI, and finally arrived at the imagination of superintelligence today. This account, to a great extent, blinds us from seeing the epistemological rupture between organism and mechanism, which was already pronounced by Immanuel Kant in the Critique of Judgment, and which was only realized in cybernetics. And this was the history that I tried to work out in my latest book, Recursivity and Contingency. In Critique of Judgment, Immanuel Kant developed what he calls reflective judgment to describe an operation, which does not follow pre-given rules like schematization in the transcendental apprehension. Rather, it starts from the particular in order to arrive at the universal rules, namely that it derives its own rules in the process of moving towards an telos, which could not be demonstrated objectively and which is not given, which is not pre-given. And the question of telos, the question of the final cause. This idea of the immediately, this idea of, for example, the idea of the beautiful is not pre-given. We cannot give a standard of the beautiful because it will immediately confront its negation or it confronts objections. If you say that the work of Paul Cézanne, for example, the Mont Saint-Victoire, is beautiful, while the person next to you may say, no, it is probably the opposite. However, the beautiful is also not subjective, because if it is merely subjective, then there is no beautiful. The most brilliant idea of Kant is that the beautiful is subjective objective, meaning that its objectivity could be known through the subject while it is not pre-given, it is not demonstrable. It is only through reflective judgment, and here, especially in the analysis of the beautiful, it's called aesthetic judgment, that we can arrive at the idea of the beautiful, which is universal and necessary. Now, this is why Gilbert Simondon, in an article titled Cybernetics and Epistemology, claims that it is only in the Critique of Judgment that Immanuel Kant was able to deal with cybernetics. Because reflective judgments owe certain affinity to the notion of feedback, and its teleology doesn't have to be a fatalist one. In a recent book by another French philosopher, Catherine Malabou, Morphing Intelligence, she admitted her mistake of opposing brain plasticity to machine intelligence, which she said in her earlier work, What Should We Do with Our Brain, published in 2004. As she wrote in this new book, I was indeed mistaken in what should we do with our brain. Plasticity is not, as I argued then, the opposite of the machine, the determining element that stops us from equating the brain with a computer. What Malabou says is true, that a contemporary machine is no longer mechanistic as many philosophers still believe so. But rather they are recursive, namely they employ a nonlinear causality to arrive at the telos, like the behavior of an organism. However, I don't think that Malabou's equating the brain with a computer is I do think that Malabou's equating the brain with a computer is a complete mistake. And that is what we want to call now, and maybe we have time to discuss later, a digital vitalism. If I have time, maybe I will discuss what I call a political naturalism and a digital vitalism. These are the two worst things that we have today. Now let's spend a moment on this history concerning weak and strong AI. Nonetheless, if we look into the development from weak AI, which is also called good old-fashioned AI, to strong AI, which is associated with machine learning, for example, it is also a further implications of the recursive thinking of cybernetics. Weak AI, though based on recursive machines, for example the Turing machine, was not yet able to comprehend the recursivity between cognition and the world. It ignores the fact that cognition is embedded in the world and also embodies it. And therefore intelligence had to be understood as a recursive operation between cognition and the world, which constantly modifies the structure resulting from their coupling. We can see that recursion is a thinking which can take place on, I emphasize here, multiple orders of magnitude. For example, the Turing machine or Gödel's general recursive function on the one order, for example, running at the back of the computer, and the structural coupling between the artificial intelligence simulated by the Turing machine and the world outside of it on the other order. Cybernetics with digital recursive machines characterizes a turning point in history in which machine intelligence exceeds the stereotype soulless automaton described by Descartes. Now, if you remember that in the meditation, Descartes says that when I look out of my window, I wonder if these people passing by are not automatas wearing hat and coat. The circular causality implemented in machines seems to suggest a movement analogical to the soul. The soul is that which returns to itself in order to determine itself. For the Greeks, especially Aristotle, thinking or reasoning, noem, is a process in which the eye of reasoning recursively transcends both the eye of perceiving and imagining, so that the errors of imagination and perception could be examined and corrected, and the intelligence will remain unaffected. Now, this is basic thesis of the chapter 3 of book 3 of his De Anima. Cicero renders noiesus into intelligentsia in Latin, inter meaning between, lego means to collect and to choose, and finally to read. Namely the capacity to understand and recognize. Invoking the Stoic, Cicero also mobilized intelligentsia and the faculty of language to distinguish human beings from animals, like the gods. Human beings have reason while animals do not have. which is in the book 2 of On the Nature of God. This anthropocentrism, as you know, today must be fundamentally challenged. The secularity which characterized the soul was not thematized, but only remains implicit in philosophy, maybe we can say, until the German idealism. German idealism could be seen as an attempt to re-articulate the I think of Kant in terms